let's talk about some of the tools that we use for painting, brushes and palette knives. If you thought there were a lot of options for paints, just wait until you look at the options for brushes. There are tons and tons. And this is another area that can get very overwhelming and very confusing very quick. So let me again try to break it down and simplify it. And I'll start by cutting your knowledge into half right now of two different types of brushes, very easily distinguishable. If you look at the handle on any of the brushes that I show you, you're going to notice that these are long handle brushes. They're probably, I don't know, between 8 and 10 inches long. This is an acrylic and oil painting brush length. Those brushes are used for oil painting, acrylic painting, caseins, alkyds, all that good stuff. Short handle brushes that you'll find, brushes that probably end about here and have slightly smaller heads most likely, are watercolor painting brushes. There are exceptions to every rule, of course, but the main reason for these two different types is the nature of how the painter works. Where a watercolor artist will most likely be working on a horizontal surface, very small and doing fine detail work, they would need a short handle brush for more control. An oil painter or an acrylic painter working maybe at an easel or on a table would want to stand back further. The brush is an extension of your hand and your arm, so you want to make sure that you can manipulate it the way you would a pencil or anything else. So that's the reason why the longer handles are better suited for oil and acrylic for the most part, and you'll find that long handle brushes are what we're going to be looking at here, so you can forget about all those short handle brushes that you find in a catalog or a store and just focus on these. So there you go, that's half the brushes taken care of. There are different types of hairs that are used and different types of shapes of heads of brushes. So what I'm going to go through is a couple of the basics of hair and the basics of the different shapes of the head. So right here I have a collection of 3 different types of brush hairs. We have our Jewel Professional Bristle line. Bristle brushes are made out of a hog's hair. They're very stiff and coarse. They're known for their brush stroke retention. Now what that means is when you take one of these larger brushes and apply it to a canvas, when you do that stroke, you'll see like every individual hair being pulled down. It's great for creating texture, great for doing things like landscapes and scenery, things that we want to build big body up on. They can hold a lot of paint because they're stiffer, and they definitely have a place in most artist studios. Next we have our Pro Stroke brushes. These are Red Sable brushes. Red Sable is known for its softness and its smooth lines. Where the bristle has brush stroke retention, the Red Sable has little to none. This is particularly good where you want a smooth, even tone, great for portraiture work, maybe even things like architecture where the painting would look more consistent and less textural effects from a brush. And finally we have Vermeer, which is a mongoose hair brush. Mongoose is actually a kind of nice synergy of bristle and sable. It takes kind of the benefits of both and leaves the weaknesses of both out. And that is being, it has the softness of the sable, so you get very few brush lines and a very nice smooth painting experience, but they're also slightly stiffer than Red Sable, but not as stiff as bristle, so that gives it that same bounce and capacity for paint load. So it's a really nice in-between brush. And of course this is just 3 types of many different kinds of hair you'll find on the market. There's squirrel hair, there's synthetics, there's sable synthetic blends, golden tack-ons, white nylon, the list goes on and on and on. For the most part though, for oil painting, it's a safe bet to stick with natural hair, and although there are some other options like black sable and whatnot, these are the 3 more commonly used, so it's a good place to get started. And the value brush sets that we have already prearranged are a great way to get a good range of brushes within each of these lines. So the next thing, having said that, is let's talk about the different types of brushes within the sets. Brush hairs come in many different varieties. This one right here is what is known as a flat or a bright. There is a distinction between the 2 of them. This one is closer to a bright. The main difference is a bright is closer to a square and a flat is closer to a triangle in its length. The basic difference between the 2 and the reason you'd want either longer or shorter hair is that having shorter hair gives you greater control, having longer hair gives you more paint load capacity. So it depends on that balance of which one you want. And you would use a bright or a flat to do hard lines. Obviously with that sharp edge, you'll be able to achieve corners of buildings. You'll be able to achieve any types of situations where you'll want a harder line. Next, I'll show you a round. Rounds are all, well, like they say, round. If I turned it around, you'll see that it changes very little to none. This is basically the pencil of the artist brush line, and it's great for doing detail. You know, there's tons of different sizes from like 000 up to like 20. So, you know, depending on the thickness of the line you want, and the amount of control you want, there's tons of options. And this, you do your detail work, you do anything where you'd want a thinner straight line. Very handy tool. This brush is what's known as a filbert. Filbert looks kind of like a flat, only it doesn't have any sharp edges. It's rounded at the edge, almost like your finger is. What this brush is good for is doing paintings where you don't want necessarily hard edges or lines. Certain painting applications, let's say you're doing a portrait, really there's nowhere on my face except for maybe in between, you know, where skin creases meet or eyelids meet. There are no sharp points on your face. And so if you're using a bright or a flat, the brush might accidentally make one for you where you don't want one. So using something like a filbert gives you the opportunity to paint a little bit more freely without worrying about creating some of these lines in inappropriate places. And just for your information, a size 6 filbert is probably one of the most commonly used brushes for artists. Definitely a great brush for doing your underpainting and blocking out a painting. Very common to use for many artists. A fan brush, which is like this brush here, definitely your tricks brush. There really isn't that many actual painting applications where you're covering large areas with this brush. As you might be able to see here, it's very thin. It is not designed to hold a lot of paint. What it is used for is doing many different painting techniques such as blending. If I was to do clouds and I wanted to soften them, I could very easily use these hairs to soften the edges. Also, can be used for creating highlights on things. Many different techniques like that. It's more of a tricks and benefits brush. Still useful, still a lot of fun to use. Definitely probably one of the better known by name brushes. And I use them when I paint probably at least every other painting. So anyway, that covers the basics. You'll find brushes that are in between all these, of course, but those are the main names that you have to worry about and the main applications of them. So I hope that was a little bit helpful in clarifying. Now, before I let you go, we want to focus on one other important thing, which is palette knives. Palette knives, or better known now as painting knives, were originally developed for just simply mixing paint on your palette. But artists, especially over the last few years, have gotten more involved in using them in their actual painting applications. When you're mixing on your palette and you're using a brush, sometimes it's not ideal. You're going to have inconsistencies because some of the paint is going to have gotten to the bristles before it's completely mixed. You're going to get paint on your ferrule. It can be a mess. So artists sometimes opt to use painting knives to mix their color and then go with a clean brush. These 4 sizes here are the more common sizes that I use. They each do their own little thing that's very helpful to me. This little guy here is great for doing more fine detail work and mixing smaller areas of paint when I only need a little bit. This is definitely probably the one I use the most, mixing any amount of paint I want. Gives me good control on the canvas, creating shapes. This tool is kind of unique. I find that as I'm mixing colors, I might want to color in between or a little piece of one or the other, and I don't want to ruin other colors I've made. So this is my little navigator tool where I'm able to dig in between colors and bring them out to the side so that they don't mess up any of my other colors. And finally, this palette knife here, this is a Creative Mark 59, S59. This is very useful for its fine, sharp edge. Whether it's creating hard lines in paintings or, like Bob Ross used to do, creating breaks in snowy mountains, it's very helpful. Plus, if you let your paint dry on your palette accidentally, it's great for helping you scrape it up. So that is brushes and palette knives. All of them are good products. All of them have their own uses. I hope you get to choose which ones are best for you.